Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff. This week on the show, we are continuing our Weekly Suit Gundam extravaganza journey through the world of Mobile Suit Gundam, The Origin. You'll be hearing our discussion of Part 3 this week of that series in our ongoing Gundam The Origin mini-series, which is actual Weekly Suit Gundam. We're doing Gundam Weekly. It's been a lot of fun. But before we do that, we're just going to talk about some stuff, shoot the shit. There was no real entertainment news this week, I don't think, but just want to do a little check-in.
Yeah, everyone saw, what happened with Activision Blizzard. It's like, let's just calm down for a week. Let's just give everybody a week to let that settle in a little bit before you do any other kinds of announcements.
Yeah, let it settle in that we are in not late-stage capitalism, but end-stage capitalism.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's about right. Sean, do you have any stuff for us? What have you been up to?
I don't have a huge amount of stuff because it's most of my free time has been on reading the Origin manga. But I have been doing a little bit of stuff. The main thing is that I wanted to talk about is that I've been playing the new event, which is the new Lantern Rite Festival in Genshin Impact, which I mostly want to mention just because I think, Jonathan, you should play it, specifically because Miho US hit on a thing with their last couple of big festival events that I really like. And the cooking festival was the best example of it. They've kind of moved into this mode where the big festival style events are mostly an excuse to have stories where you just go around and visit different groups of characters and get to have a group of characters that interact with each other, which in the old content in Genshin Impact, you usually only were kind of one-on-one with each of the characters in the game. Now they're focusing more on small groups of characters and getting to spend some time with them. And it's been really fun with the new Lantern Rite Festival. There's been two kind of quest chains they've done that's mostly just kind of you walking around and hanging out with people. But there's one that I really think you need to play, Jonathan, because I know how much you like Beidou, the Pirate Queen in that game. And
I do.
You get to see her in all her Pirate Queen glory because she's been hired by Ningguang to go recover remains of the old Jade Palace from the bay where Liyue Harbor is, and there are a bunch of other treasure hoarders that are also taking that treasure, and she's not too happy about that, and she really puts them in their place, and there's some really, really good fucking Beidou shit in the most recent event.
Okay, that is fantastic. It's actually funny that you bring this up, Sean, because I just opened Genshin up for the first time in a couple months this week, and I've been checking in and doing the dailies and just grabbing. They're doing an event right now where they give you a bunch of primo gems, and I have the return thing. If you've been away for a little while, they give you return items. So I've been doing that, and I haven't dived into some of the new story stuff yet. Is there a specific quest line associated with the Lantern Rite to look for?
Yeah, so I think you might have to do the intermission quest. I don't know what they call it exactly, but there's a quest line where you meet two of the new characters from the last update, Yunjin and Shinha. That's kind of like a continuation of the Liyue story. It's almost like an epilogue to the Liyue main story from last year.
Nice.
And so I think you probably have to finish that. I actually don't know for sure, but you probably do. And that's really good. And then once you do that, then it'll just be a world quest that'll open up that's connected to the festival.
Okay.
And then you can just play that.
Nice, yeah, because I'm kind of I've been going through and looking at all the stuff I have to do, and I do think Genshin, it is kind of funny, every time I come back after a couple weeks or months away, it is so much more accessible than any, long-running game like this to, come back to. It does not overwhelm you with stuff, and things, I always appreciate how well laid out the menus and everything in Genshin are when I come back, and I immediately remember how to do everything. I don't have to be where was that option here? There's none of that, I feel that I would always get with Destiny or something.
Yeah. I mean, they keep the game very clean by having, it's more about the rotational festival events, and then each update adds one or two kind of big permanent things to the game. So right. You got probably a couple of character missions like Ito's mission and stuff like that you haven't done. And then all the Inkonomiya stuff, which is really good. It's a whole area they've added that you can explore. And all that stuff is fantastic. But you don't have to bother about and then here's 50 different fiddly other little quests from every little thing that we've done, because that kind of stuff that is fun, but is not major permanent addition kind of stuff that they need to add to the game. That stuff just sort of filters through as the events go around. So I think it keeps the game very clean and accessible in that way.
Is the Lantern Rite here for like the current update, like the next 2-3 weeks? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I specifically jumped back in because I want to roll for. They've got a banner with the what's the rock god's name? The 5-star.
Zhongli.
Yeah, Zhongli. I want to get him. I know they've got him and Ganyu, and Ganyu looks great, but I have some very good Ice 5 stars already, and I don't have any really good Geo characters, so I really want to get him. He's awesome.
Yeah, Zhongli is one of the best characters in the game because he's a character that can fit on. He can basically make any team better. If you have like an open slot to put on a team, because he basically just has an incredibly powerful shield he can just put up if you just hold down his elemental skill. And his elemental burst does also do good damage. So yeah, because Zhongli is obviously a really cool character in the story, but he is also, in a practical sense, like if there are people who play Genshin listening to this, and you're trying to decide between Ganyu and Zhongli which one you want to roll for, like Ganyu is one of the best DPS characters in the game, but if you already have a good DPS character, you're probably building teams around that character. Zhongli is a character that, like, once I figured out how to use him, because I got him on the last rerun they did, that would like totally changed up a lot of team possibilities because he kind of he can make it so that you don't have to worry about dodging and that kind of stuff almost at all with a lot of enemy types because of how good his shield is.
Yeah, he seems really cool. So I have already been collecting some Primo Gems and Wishes and working on that. So I will. The only problem is I am still spending most of my free time playing Persona 5, which I'm near the end of what the original game was. I'm in the final Mementos Palace. So that means I really have that, and then but that's pretty straightforward, and then whatever the additional stuff at the end is, which I still don't know what that is. So we're going to find out.
Yeah.
That's
most of my stuff. Yeah, my stuff is mostly just Genshin Impact and doing some Gundam shit.
Yeah, I mean, just so everyone knows, we will probably be doing the big Persona 5 The Royal episode next week.
Yeah. I would assume you'd be done with the game based on where you are.
Yes. So I don't have that much, I guess I should say right now, other than I have now seen all the Shuichi Ikeda stuff in Persona 5. Jesus Christ almighty, Sean. Like, it's so amazing that they did this thing where they cast this legendary voice actor. They really clearly build the part around him, and then he also just dials everything up to 11 and brings it 110%. It is such an amazing thing. Every part with Shido, that character in Persona 5 Royal, took me forever to get through because I would keep hitting the log and going and listening to Ikeda's line readings and the nice, clean, no music, just hear the voice. Oh my god, Sean. And then I'm just more convinced than ever that his boss fight is the best boss fight in a JRPG.
Yeah.
Like, it's fun. I like that part of it. But mostly it's just the presentation of him on a giant lion and then ripping his shirt off and then becoming a golden god. And all the while, like, he has a fucking Char mask on for half of it. Yep. It is so amazing, Sean. And you get Rivers in the Desert, which is one of my, I think, 2 favorite ever Persona songs. My god, it's so good. No, it is amazing. And yeah, I just remembered very distinctly absolutely losing my shit when I first played that game in like the Japanese version and got to that boss fight and saw him wearing the Char mask and being like, oh, okay, like they would 100% know what the fuck they're doing, and it's amazing. Sean, Persona 5 is a good game.
Yep.
No one needs us to tell them that, but we're going to, and then probably we'll do a nice big giant Royal episode next week, and then I'll figure out how to cut that into the 10-hour spoiler cast we already have and make the Royal version of the spoiler cast.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be completely seamless. I'm sure just throw it right in there. Nobody will even notice.
It's going to be great. Anyway, that's been my stuff. I guess I'll just briefly mention it. I don't know where we would ever fit this into a larger discussion, but I know it's one of your favorite TV shows, and I just wanted to mention I have been taking the time where we're watching Gundam The Origin, but that is not a all-week thing. That is like Saturday nights I do that so we can record on the podcast. So I've been watching some American TV, and I have finally gone back, Sean, and I've now seen the entire first season of the HBO classic Deadwood. I'm specifically watching it because one of my favorite critics, Matt Zoller Sites, has a really cool-looking book coming out about Deadwood in a couple weeks here. It's, if you're interested in it, it's a limited thing he's only pressing 5,000 copies of, and it looks really cool. But anyway, I'm like, I want to read that, and that's a show that I've always known I was going to, like, head over heels love. And I was almost intimidated by like how much I knew I was going to love it. And indeed, I've seen it now, and I am intimidated by how much I love it. That might just be the best show I've ever seen, with the asterisk around not counting like anime, and then Doctor Who's kind of its own thing, and Twin Peaks: The Return is up there. Other than that, that's about as like good as TV
of
gets.
like the kind of TV show that it is, because it's hard to like compare. Like, how does Deadwood compare to Jeopardy? That's an insane conversation to have. You know, obviously we did our top 10 TV shows list, but yes, if you're looking at like other kinds of like, you know, TV dramas in that kind of HBO style, it is up. It's like one of the best ever, easily. Yeah.
I think the thing I am in awe of, and obviously it's the thing everyone is in awe of with Deadwood, but the writing, I mean, it is probably the best English language dialogue writing I have ever heard for TV, definitely, but maybe just for film, too. Like, it is Shakespearean. And I know that's a word that's thrown around a lot, but, like, I think it genuinely... I mean, one, David Milch, like, writes in iambic pentameter because he's a lunatic, but also, like, it is just... It's the kind of dialogue where I leave the subtitles on when I'm watching it just so I can better appreciate the syntax of how sentences are put together, because it is so fascinating. Like, I had a day recently where I went to see the new Coen brother movie. It's only one of them. Joel Coen did this new version of Macbeth. Have you seen that yet, Sean?
I haven't seen it, but I definitely will. Yeah.
You should. You will love it, and it'll be a good teaching tool, I'm sure, in the future, too, because it's a great movie version of Macbeth. But I watched that, and it's a great movie version of Macbeth and uses all the original language and does it beautifully. And then I went home and watched an episode of Deadwood, and I think I watched the episode where, this is a spoiler from history, Wild Bill Hickok dies.
What? Wild Bill Hickok got shot while he's playing a poker game? Crazy. Who knew that?
Well, and that's episode 4, and that's one of the best episodes of Deadwood, and one of the best episodes of TV ever. And it was amazing to me to notice the affinities between this Macbeth movie and then watching this HBO show, and it's like, the level of writing is like of a similar caliber, and that's an insane thing to say, but I think if you've seen it, you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, and it's very much intentionally, it is like in this heightened style that is poetic, and like it definitely is taking cues stylistically from Shakespeare in that kind of era of English language writing, with characters delivering full on soliloquies and things like that, like effectively to camera. It is a fascinating thing because it is such a kind of lost art form, because we have tended to much more naturalistic dialogue writing for like the past 100+ years. But it is really cool to see, partially because it's a lot easier overall to write more naturalistic dialogue than it is to write really good, super heightened stylistic dialogue like Shakespeare or like what Deadwood does. But when you get something that does that style and does it as exceptionally well as Deadwood does, like, it just makes all other writing and all other things just feel like, like a 5-year-old did it or something in comparison. Like the amount
really
of like depth and richness to the language is pretty incomparable in terms of like Deadwood comparing it to other shows. It's just like what is executing on that level is really phenomenal.
I wish to death that there was a book of the scripts out that I could open and just peruse,
Yeah.
Because it is the same way, like, when I went to see Macbeth, I went home and opened my copy of Macbeth to, like, look at, like, I need to look at the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow speech again, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
It's really amazing stuff. Ian McShane, who I've loved from a million other things, I think that's the best performance I've ever seen on American TV. I don't know, it's, the other ones I would put, like, on that plane are things like Kyle MacLachlan in Twin Peaks, some of the people in The Wire, stuff like that, but like it's incomparable, and it's just an amazing, and like the historical like coincidence that there was this man in this place whose last name was Swearingen, which sounds like swear engine, and then David Milch has him say the word fuck every third or fourth word, like literally. It's the most beautiful thing in the world.
Yeah.
It's insane. I have to say, I love everyone in the show. Other than Ian McShane, I think my favorite performance is Brad Dourif as the Doctor, Doc Cochran. Yeah. I've loved Brad Dourif in a million things. I actually forgot he was in Deadwood. I've loved Brad Dourif since I was a kid. I mean, obviously he's in Lord of the Rings. He's in a lot of other things. He's also in Myst 3 Exile, the video game. He is the bad guy in that, and it is, if you've never seen like the clips of him in Myst 3, go watch like a clip compilation of him in Myst 3, because it's an amazing performance, way over the top, but like he understood the assignment. Anyway, but this is like, you know, he's getting to do Shakespeare basically, and it is incredible, and he's one of the characters who gets just full-on soliloquies. I love that. Will Sanderson as E.B. Farnham, who like basically by the end of it is doing the Greek chorus thing where he will be watching the heroes do the main action of the show, and then he will turn to camera and talk about what he just saw, and I'm just like, this is so fascinating that this got on TV anywhere at any time. Like, I'm so amazed by this whole thing. And then, of course, Timothy Olyphant, who is Timothy Olyphant, and it is fun in that first season to watch him become Timothy Olyphant, neo-Western legend. you know?
Yeah. It is definitely like because, you know, that is really early in his career. And it feels like you're seeing him become who he is as an actor. And it's really fascinating to, when you eventually get to the movie that they made like 2 years ago, like seeing like that contrast of him as an actor and like how much more comfortable he is in that kind of role, but in a way that is so synergistic with the character, where I think there is a certain amount of like discomfort I think you can kind of feel in his performance early in Deadwood, because it's something on a scale he's never really done as an actor, but it synchronizes so much with the character that it just fits perfectly. That you know, Bullock is a guy who's like very uncomfortable in his own skin because he's so, you know, he's so pent up with like all that anger and everything that he's feeling, and he's such an awkward person, so clumsy with and how to express those feelings, and it just like kind of explodes out of him at times. That, yeah, I think it's like such a cool role for him to play, and then see him grow, and then he goes and plays like the coolest person in the history of television, which is Raylan in Justified, and then he comes back to Seth Bullock bringing all of that kind of like swagger that he learned. Like that arc for the character when you get to the movie is so extremely satisfying.
Have you heard about they're doing a new season of Justified?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are you excited about that?
Yeah, because it's all like the same people.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's based on a different Elmore Leonard novel, from what I understand.
Yes.
So yeah,
that's such a cool idea to just take because it's an Elmore Leonard novel without Raylan Givens, but they're going to put him into it, and that's awesome. Elmore Leonard has a lot of books that could become great movies, you know, and shows. Anyway, yeah, getting off topic, Deadwood's great. I also just think like I don't think anyone would say like the overall like narrative arcing is like in the top 5 things that make Deadwood special, because like there's so many other things. But I do think the arcing of that first season at least is fascinating, where it is about these two characters, Al and Seth, who are, and I've never quite seen this character dynamic, who are running from being better men. Like they are both people who kind of want to just be selfish and sit in their little corner of the world and make their money and do their thing, and they keep being called by the better angels of their nature to help build community. And of course it's extra fascinating with Al, who is a murderer and a pimp and all these things, but deep down you keep seeing over and over again he's the most civically minded person in the entire camp. And so I just like it's such an interesting inverse of the 2000s anti-hero on TV, where it's often people who have a moral conscience and want to be better but keep being bad, and it's the exact opposite in Deadwood, and I think that's one of the things that makes it so fascinating and beautiful.
Yeah, because it's a show that it's the best exploration of like doing kind of an ensemble piece that is about like community, because that's what Deadwood is about as a show. It is about like this weird ragtag group of people out on like the edges of like what they consider to be civilization, trying to build a community for themselves. And the way that brings out, in many ways, it brings out like the best of these people. Even though they're mostly murderers and thieves and gamblers and drunks, you know, that they are like kind of the dregs of that society, but them all having to learn how to build a society together that works for them, makes them all better, even if they don't necessarily want to be. And that's definitely like a running sort of core theme throughout the entire show.
It's so good, and I do think that sense of community it builds, even through just that one season by the end, because it's got, you know, this is the era of HBO I love, where, and they still do this to an extent, but where they just have a cast of thousands. They just have so many people, and like in those best shows, they're all great. You're never cutting to any character where you're like, I don't want to see this character's subplot. You know, like when they would do a story with like Hank's wife on Breaking Bad, and it's like, it's not the actress's fault, but this scene exists because they can't overwork Bryan Cranston. You never get that on Deadwood or something like that.
Yeah, because Deadwood is conceptualized very much as an ensemble, so it's like it's always got like 8 different plates that it's spinning at any given time, and all of them are as interesting as every other plate that's being spun. So like whenever you're cutting to a different character, you're interested to see what that character is up to, and it's always so well thought about how those things either directly or in interesting indirect ways reflect on whatever the core dynamic of the episode is that you're watching.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm having fun with that. HBO makes good stuff. It's fun to be watching that. I know this is not in any way a current event sort of thing, but because you had talked about it on episode 350 or whenever we did our top 10 TV shows, I just wanted to bring that up because, man, it would be on mine if we were redoing that list.
Yeah, and if people listening to this conversation haven't watched Deadwood, it's one of those shows that like easily lives up to its reputation, or like for me, it like surpassed the reputation that it had. Yeah. Like I think that show's better than I had heard it.
Well, because it's sort of in the HBO trinity of Sopranos, Wire, Deadwood, but it's always kind of been a little off to the side because it was initially unfinished. It's significantly weirder than those shows.
Yeah.
It's I think The Wire is also hard to get into for various reasons, but it's kind of like The Wire. You kind of have to relearn how to watch TV to watch it. So it's always been a little off to the side, and it shouldn't be. It's on par with those shows, if not better than. Yeah. So anyway, that's what I've been up to. Been doing that. Been playing Persona. Trying to get back into Genshin a little bit. This new Pokemon game came out, and my copy has not arrived yet, but I am going to try that out. So we'll see how that is.
Did you hear that apparently it's not the Pokeball that makes the Pokemon shrink? It's that they have some sort of innate biological ability to become very small, and that's how they fit the Pokeballs?
No, apparently, I haven't heard that.
Apparently that is a thing that, from what I understand, has always actually been secretly a part of the video game version of Pokemon lore, because apparently the anime treats it differently. But there was like a thing that went viral on Twitter because there is a conversation with, I'm assuming, the professor character in this new Pokemon Legends game, where he says that specifically, and it blew everybody's minds. And now I am obsessed with the idea that all Pokemon have some sort of biological capacity to become effectively microscopic and fit into a tiny little sphere.
This brings up the inevitable question of, are there animals in the world of Pokemon, or are all animals Pokemon? And if all animals are Pokemon, then all animals can shrink. Why can't humans in this world? What biologically separates the humans from the Pokemon in this world? Because we think of like humans versus animals. We're all animals, and humans have lots of creatures on Earth, mammals and all of that, who have a lot of similarities with us, right? So what is that? This begs a lot of questions, Sean.
I mean, think of it. This means that because I think that it's supposed to be that like most Pokemon can't do it by will, and that's why you have to beat the shit out of them, is because the reason why they get small is because they're like recovering or whatever. They're like conserving their energy, so they shrink in size. But it does mean that like Mr. Mime, which is effectively just a person that looks kind of weird, has the ability to shrink to the size of 6 inches tall or whatever it is to fit inside of one of those Pokeballs. But it does fix a question I've always had about Pokemon, which was, I had always assumed, as I think most people did, because again, I think this is what the anime's logic is, and so I think this is just how everyone thinks of it, and because it makes way more sense, that the Pokeball is a piece of super technology that allows it to shrink Pokemon and fit inside it or whatever, which I've always wondered, can Team Rocket just engage in human trafficking by just putting humans in the Pokeballs and sending humans through Pokeballs into slave labor camps or something? What's the real dark shit going on in the Pokemon world? And this solves that problem, because presumably humans don't grow or become very tiny if you hurt them in the world of Pokemon. It's only Pokemon, which now I'm just convinced Pokemon are some sort of sinister parasitic alien race that arrived in ancient Earth on a meteor and just takes the form of weird other creatures, like it's the Thing from John Carpenter's The Thing or some shit.
That's amazing. This is the thing actually I'm excited for with Pokemon Legends, is it's set like 1,000 years in the past, so it's all about like how all of the like Pokemon, things were sort of created, like the Pokeballs and like your Pokedex is a physical journal you're writing in. All that sounds really cool. It actually looks like a pretty cool game to me. It's basically Pokemon Monster Hunter, except you don't, I presume, beat the Pokemon with giant swords and shit.
No, you just make them fight each other, and then make them shrink, and then you put them inside a little ball that you made, and then carry them around on your waist.
Does this mean
you just have a little tiny Pikachu or whatever inside this little sphere? But it's just that Pikachu. You didn't make it small; it became small, and you then put it in a little sphere, and now it's just on your belt at all times.
That is so horrific, but this also makes me think. Does that mean the Master in Doctor Who is essentially using the same technology when he shrinks people?
Yes. He's using a Pokemon ray is actually what it is. He's inducing a Pokemon-like state on his victims when he's shooting them with his shrink ray.
All right. Sean, I've thought, since I just mentioned Doctor Who, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to respond to the persistent rumors that David Tennant is going to be the 14th Doctor. Do you want to give us the 10-word response to that rumor?
Fucking, of course that's not what's going to happen, you idiots.
All right. Let's talk some Gundam.
Yeah, let's talk some Gundam. Hello and welcome to Weekly Suit Gundam, the special bonus podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I am Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again on another week of the show, talking about one of the best Gundam shows, Mobile Suit Gundam: The Origin, the adaptation of the manga of the same name by Yoshikazu Yasuhiko. And today we are talking about episode number 3, Dawn of Rebellion, which you could also call Dawn of Char, because this is where we get to meet our boy Char Aznable in Mobile Suit Gundam: The Origin proper, because he does some pretty cool fucking shit and some fucked up shit in this episode.
Sean, this has been one of the most excited, one of the episodes I've been most excited to record for 3+ years now, because, or almost 3 years. We're coming up on 3 years. Sorry, because I'm so excited. I'm all jumbled up here because, as I've said before, Gundam: The Origin, one of the first Gundam things I watched after watching First Gundam with you on the show. And I don't know if episode 3 is my absolute favorite. I will have to rewatch 4, 5, and 6 and make that decision. But I do know that I think Dawn of Rebellion is one of, if not just the most entertaining hours in the history of Gundam. Like, it is, I could watch this thing multiple times in a row. It is such an entertaining 60 minutes of television. And it is easily one of my favorite individual Gundam episodes, because if you like Char being an evil sociopath in Mobile Suit Gundam, this is one of the best concentrated doses of delicious evil Char mixed with a bunch of other good stuff. It's got Char and Garma. Oh man, I've been excited to talk about this for literal years now, and I have pages of notes. I love this episode so much.
Yeah, it's really great, because it's that thing I think you talked about in the first episode of us covering The Origin, that some of The Origin feels like it's like the HBO version of Gundam, where you get these big, like, luxurious hour-long episodes, and this is in particular that like it is both. It gets like the luxurious production values, but the other thing about HBO shows is that they are just like intensely entertaining, and they just have good violence and like good big character beats and stuff like that. And that is very much what this is, and you just get to play with Char, is kind of what this feels like. It's just this episode gets to have so much fun with that character. One of the things I found very fascinating is that, as with last week's episode, I've caught up with and read the manga version of this, and this is, of the episodes we've covered so far, like by far the most different.
Yep.
Any of the episodes are. There are lots of changes. There are omissions. There are additions. In such a way that I kind of almost think of this section of the manga and this episode as slightly different things, because they're telling slightly different stories, and that's really interesting, because episode 1 and 2 are super close adaptations of the manga, so much so that either one could basically be a replacement for the other. You could watch the OVA of episode 1 and then pick up where that ends, where the manga begins, and just move on, and you would not really notice a difference. Whereas with this episode, like, they're kind of different things, and that's pretty interesting as like an adaptational choice.
There's at least one big change that I've thought of since I read the manga, and I have a giant like paragraph of text summarizing in my notes because I didn't know that you were gonna be this far in the manga for us. But there's one that actually like significantly changes your reading of the entire series, honestly. But yeah, and there's probably a bunch of smaller ones that I don't remember off the top of my head because I have not. I read the manga about half a year ago. But yeah, it is it's also a good feat of adaptation. This is another one that like laser focused on what the arc is and starts with Char doing the murder that makes him Char and ends with him embracing his love for the color red. And along the way, this is also the episode where Shuichi Ikeda, he's been a little muzzled. You know, in that first episode, he doesn't get much because it's mostly Mayumi Tanaka doing the part. In episode 2, he's mostly playing Edward Mass. He's playing someone who is not quite Char Aznable yet. And in this episode, Sean, they open the cage door and they say, "Fly, Shuichi Ikeda, fly!" And he fucking soars. He is so good in this one, Sean. Oh my god.
I mean, it's my main memory of watching this originally was just coming away from it feeling like, I have always wanted this. I've just wanted an hour of Char doing Char shit, right? Like, if you just ignore all the rest of, like, the cool stuff that's going on and the only thing you take away from it is it was incredibly entertaining watching this, like, scheming, mischievous, sociopathic, terrifying motherfucker just, like, manipulate everything around him to the point of basically starting the 1-year war, and setting off on the, like, getting people killed through manipulating events and setting off on his path to eventually manipulate the person who he's posing as, like, basically his best friend in the future / the past, depending on your perspective on like the flashback and all that kind of stuff. It is just the most Char ass shit all the way through. And yes, this is where Shuichi Ikeda just gets to, like, just go full bore into the character in a way that we have not been able to see since, like, Unicorn Gundam with Full Frontal, you know, of just this Shuichi Ikeda just loving every single line he gets off that script in the way that only he can.
Yes. Oh my god. It is. This is why we watch Gundam, man. This is good fucking stuff. So, where do you want to begin with episode 3, Dawn of Rebellion?
Let's begin with the beginning, because this is where, you know, one of the kind of the changes they've made is from the manga, adjusting where some, like, kind of the stories begin and end. So this episode has almost like a cold open. It's got the same, you know, like the narration of Aki Otsuka and everything we talked about before. And then after that, you get the scene at the airport with actual Char Aznable and Casval Rem Deikun posed as Edward Mass, and the whole circumstances of Casval Zabi plotting Edward Mass's death, and then Edward switching identities with Char Aznable, getting the actual Char Aznable killed, and then Casval Rem Deikun adopting Char's identity and going on his happy way to Zoom City. And all that happens at the end of, like, the previous volume or whatever, the manga, and here it's effectively a cold open that then goes into the title Dawn of Rebellion for this episode, and it's stylized in some very different ways than that sequence is done in the manga that I think is very interesting.
Yeah, I think, because I was reading through it last night, just that scene, and that scene has some great stylistic choices. Like, it ends on the body of the real Char Aznable floating through space, the eyes, like, in the back of the head, with, like, debris around him, and then the words Edward Mass, Texas Colony over him, as that is what he will be remembered, is the dead body of Edward Mass. But I have long loved this opening as one of my favorite things in Gundam. There's a real argument. What is the most evil thing Char Aznable did in his life? This is a candidate, right?
Yeah, it's, like, certainly, like, maybe the most cruel, just, like, the most needlessly cruel, because there's not even, like, a war going on, because for some of that other shit, at least there's a war, and that kind of, you know, it's such an extreme scenario, it can excuse some things. What like, our Char does to real Char here, of just taking this, maybe slightly misguided but pretty normal young man, Char Aznable, who's just going to go join the military because he thinks it's cool, which is a thing that I disagree with, but it's a thing that lots of people do, and it is just a part of the world. And he takes that kid, and he just, knowing every single step of the way what is happening, manipulates him, thinking that, like, with the actual Char Aznable thinking, oh my god, this is such a good guy. I can't believe how much he's looking out for me. Like, how just, like, he's just really, he thinks and cares so much about me and my future. All the while, our Char Aznable is just wafting real Char Aznable slowly into his grave, none the wiser. It is the most just pettily cruel thing he has ever done to a human being for nothing other than his own convenience and benefit.
Yes. And it is... I mean, he plays this entire Casval Zabi spy network like a fucking fiddle. He knows that if he leaves Loom, that Casval Zabi will try to get him killed. Because he's good at Casval Zabi is a smart person, but she's a fairly simple one. He understands this, right? They will try to kill me. Okay, if they're going to try to kill me, I have this kid who is my doppelganger. I will slip a gun into his bag, and I love it's probably a gun he stole from the Aznable estate, because it's like this 19th century replica, right?
It's like a Colt Army revolver from the 19th century, so like a Civil War era pistol. It's like a very nice recreation of it, because it's a very, like, if you've seen a Wild West movie, you have seen that gun, because it's like a very standard Wild West pistol. And yes, he sneaks it into his luggage.
Sneaks into his luggage, gets, the real Char to change clothes with him. The whole thing is a microcosm of what he does to Garma Zabi over the course of Garma's life, of making him think everything he's doing is for this person, when really it is against this person. They toss some wrenches in there with Garma in this episode that I think is really cool. But with this, you definitely have, he is just using Char, and Char thinks that Casval or Edward is the nicest person he's ever met, and instead he is just, again, as you say, wafting, just leading him to the slaughter. And the slaughter of, like, countless other people on that ship, like, because he also knows they're going to blow up the whole fight. Well, I don't know if he knows they're going to blow up the ship, but it's a possibility.
He doesn't care.
Yeah,
he doesn't give a shit.
He doesn't give a shit. One of my favorite, the moment where you just know that Ikeda is in full Char mode in this episode is, the real Char is, like, being really apologetic, like when he's leaving, and the guy the agent at the gate says, "Man, he sounds like you'll never see each other again." And Edward Char goes, "So desu ne," and it's like it's the most perfect Shuichi Ikeda, "So desu ne," and I love it. God damn it, I love you. He is cutting loose, and it's great.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And one thing they do here for the anime version is they take a scene in the manga of Casval Zabi hearing the news and ordering all this to happen, which is its own, like, sort of distinct scene that happens beforehand, and they turn it into this very, like, Shakespearean, like, soliloquy towards camera, basically, that is a really cool thing of, like, it's Casval Zabi against a totally black background talking into the camera, ordering this death. Then the events happen, and then she comes back into this, like, black void to talk to the camera with these lines that she has from that scene that they kind of have reordered, of her saying, like, I gave you a way to escape Casval Rem Deikun. Like, if you had just stayed quiet on Loom, none of this would have happened. But like, now I've ushered you to your death. And then that, like, melts away and the logo for the episode comes up, and that is the thing of where, as an adaptational choice, I think it's, like, such a cool way to sort of fuse these two scenes together and use it as this very, like, dramatic, powerful intro to this episode, rather than it being the tail end of the previous story arc.
Well, at 100%, and the way they do it is it's even better than what you're saying, because the ship explodes with Edward, with the real Char on it as Edward, and out of the explosion comes Caecilia's face. She has the line, and then it fades out just to her eyes over the black screen, which it's the kind of thing that Yasuhiko does do in the manga sometimes. Not in this scene specifically. That is an invention of the anime, but it feels like a very Yasuhiko touch. And then the title comes out of that. It is cool as shit.
Yeah, it's just it gets you pumped. It's very fun. It's also this is the way specifically that actual Char Aznable dies is so fucking great. Of where he's like looking for his papers because of course Casval Rem Deikun has stolen them because he's taking Char's identity. He's like, no, where's these papers? Like, if I don't have these papers, like, I won't be able to get in and ruin my life. And then he explodes.
Yep.
And the bomb is like, it's very much, it's like Sasura Zabi in episode 1. You know, Cecilia has a very clear MO for her crazy murders, which is just put a bomb directly under the seat of the one person she wants to kill. Because, like, make sure that you are going to blow the fuck up. Because both Sasuro and Char have the bombs explode from under their seat and they go, and then the whole thing goes with them.
It's, she does not take risks. When she is going to kill someone, she is going to make sure there is nothing of them left. And it is very good. And, God, I think this is such an ingenious backstory, because the idea that the Char Aznable we know got that name by making this putz kid trust him and then sending him off to die in his place is the, like, best retconned backstory of all time in terms of, like, it makes 100% sense. I fucking love it.
Yeah, it is a pretty airtight thing of, like, he's just completely adopted this other person's identity and, like, none the wiser, and he just moves on with his life because they are, like, the Zabis just firmly believe the Casval Rem Deikun is dead. Like, as far as Sayla knows, her brother is dead, even if she has some new typey, like, intuition going on. It is a very clean getaway that he has.
Very clean getaway. There is one other thing they cut in the manga here is that, and this was not needed, I think, for the anime. I think this was the right call. But there's a scene of Sayla after Casval has abandoned her, who gets Roger Aznable, the father, to, like, fly her into the docking bay to try to see if they can find him in time, and then the ship explodes. So, and I think for the way they adapted this, that's cleaner. Of the last time you see Sayla is when he leaves. I think that's smarter, and adaptationally for the anime, it's better the way they do it.
Yeah, I mean, they've made the very clear choice of focusing on these episodes, because the manga is, like, very big, and it's got, like, a lot of different characters that are involved, because, like, over the course of, like, the section that this adapts from the manga, there are lots of other scenes with, like, the Earth Federation and stuff and Tim Ray that they just don't bother with, because there's a clear intent on, we are boiling it down to who is our focused like, Daikun sibling for this episode. It was Artesia in the previous one. This one, it's Char slash Casval. And then also you have your, like, side plot of Ramba Rao and the Zabis and, like, the development of the mobile suits. And those are, like, the two main things that they key in on and focus on. And most of the other stuff is either, like, adjusted or cut to, like, make this kind of clean focus on who is our Daikun kid, and then what is going on with the mobile suit stuff.
Yeah. And it works so well for this one. I think one of the reasons why this episode just plays like gangbusters is it doesn't borrow, but it has the spine and structure of a military academy story. You know, it is, it's not quite Stripes with mobile suits, because it's not that silly, but it is kind of like the right stuff with mobile suits at certain points. There's a million, like, different military academy stories that do the exact plot of, we have a big hiking mission, and there's two rivals, and one of them gets hurt, and then the other rival decides to take pity and helps them up. Like, For All Mankind, which is one of my favorite recent American shows, does that in its, like, third episode, I think. There's just so many, like, military fiction stories that do that. And so it has this, like, sort of, like, archetypal structure to it. But it's an archetypal structure where your main character isn't some plucky young upstart. It's fucking sociopath Char Aznable trying to engineer a war.
Yes. Yeah, that's the thing that they focus on. It's much more distinct in the anime version than it is in the manga, because they've kind of narrowed it down to that specific story, and they've expanded on, like, a lot of the elements of, like, the military academy life in different ways, and focus more in on that. And I think, yeah, it works very well for this, like, hour-long, like, TV episode slash movie kind of thing that it is.
Yeah. And the other spine that it has that just makes this episode so delicious, I don't know how else to say it, is it has Garma and Char, and it has that as the key relationship of the episode. And if, there is anything I didn't quite get enough of in Gundam 79, it is more of Char subtly needling and just hopelessly gaslighting poor little Garma Zabi, and he does a lot of it here.
Yeah, and the weird, vague homoerotic attention
Yes.
between those two characters also is it's if you ship Sharma, this is the episode for you, right? It's you get Char coming out of a shower, you get him wearing a towel and Garma's in the room, it's all the things you want from these two characters, which is homoerotic tension and sociopathic manipulation, and you get a lot of it in this episode. It's great.
Well, I want to talk about that right now, actually, since you brought it up. I think that's something that the manga, Yasuhiko, and you've read enough of it that you would know this. I think Yasuhiko really plays up something that we have not actually talked about on this show, and I think we should. Char is queer. I don't know how else to say it. I don't know if he is. I wouldn't quite say he's gay. We see him in relationships with women at different points. Char is definitely on the Kinsey scale somewhere. There's just something about that, and I think it comes out in a lot in moments with Garma, but it's in other places too. And the anime, the OVA doesn't even do as much of it as is in the manga in various points of him. He's body wet out of a shower hanging out with Garma and things like that. But also down to him in the entire regalia that Char is always in. There's this is something even my students picked up on a little bit when we watched the movie trilogy, is someone asked about this and what kind of elements of queer coding are at play with that character. And I think it's something that I don't know if that was conscious in 1979, but I feel like Yasuhiko has picked up a little bit on when he comes back to it for the manga.
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting thing because it's hard to know and put yourself in the mindset, because it's such a different kind of cultural perspective of 1979 Japanese creators of what is does that code clearly is it and meant to be campy in that sense, right? In the proper sense of camp of having kind of homosexual homoerotic coding, but it certainly, it feels like it. In the fan community, it is received that way, right? In the same way that Kira and Othran's relationship in Gundam Seed is received that way, because there is a long history in anime, in manga, of coding queer relationships between characters that are never fulfilled in that way on screen, right? But are clearly there, and that fans take and run with in the Dojin fan market and create their own stories and basically fan fiction around it. And you see that that exists in certain extents in certain kinds of Western fandom. It's way more ubiquitous in otaku circles. And Char and Garma, or Sharma as anyone should call them, is definitely one of those pairings. But I think one of the things that's interesting to think about with Char is is he bisexual, or is he asexual but is canny enough to use his sexuality as a tool to manipulate people? Does he actually feel sexual desire for people, or does he know how to touch that part of people and use it as a way to manipulate them?
I think that's a real question, and I think I generally probably fall towards the latter on him. I think the queer coding is there from the beginning, whether they were conscious of it or not, because
Yes.
there's a long history in animation and everything of your villain who is a little exaggerated and campy. Disney is great at this in the 80s and 90s, and I think the culture has kind of gone on a weird 180 on this, where I think there was a time in queer studies where you would say your characters Ursula and Scar and Radigan and stuff are negative gay stereotypes because only the villains get to be gay. And then I think now it's they're the most fun characters in the fucking movie. They have personalities. They're great. Would it be nice if they had more positive representation? Sure, but Ursula is one of the most obvious examples of drag in mainstream culture, at a certain point, based on the actor Divine. So there's stuff like that, or the drag queen Divine. And Char obviously plays into a lot of that history, I think, with the way he dresses and his very particular method of talking is Frieza comes out of a similar is cut from the same cloth in Dragon Ball Z. And so I think that's always there. And then you do kind of interrogate the character themselves. And I think this is on Tomino's mind to a degree. I think it's something you're supposed to be asking in Char's counterattack, is like, he's in this long-term relationship with this woman in that, and he is sort of letting what's her name? What's the younger woman's name in that?
Quest.
Yeah, he's letting Quest have this crush on him. But I don't read in that movie that he has real sexual desire for either of those women.
Yeah, and his most important relationship in that movie is his relationship with Amuro. Like, that's where he actually has like a real connection with somebody. He doesn't really have much of a connection with like Nana, who is like the woman that he is clearly like he is sleeping with her. Like, there's no, like, the only way to make it more explicit if you literally explicitly saw them have sex, but it's like so strongly implied that you must assume that he is sleeping with Nana Miguel. But his relationship with her from his side feels so cold and like manipulative, and he's like feels like he is holding sex and like her desire for him over her as a way to like keep her working for him,
which he does with Quest.
Yes.
Yeah. And like, I think it's all somewhat complicated, because I probably go maybe slightly in between the two options you gave us, Sean, which is that like, I think he does have actual desire for Lala when we see that, and I don't know if it's a weird kind of desire, but it's something very real there. Mm-hmm. And I do think there's a certain charged nature to some of his relationships with men, that the word that I kind of keep coming back to is queer, because it's a little more all-encompassing.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be as defined, but it's like we could devote a whole other podcast to this. There's a lot to break down there.
Yeah, because part of the thing in Char's counterattack with Quest is also that like he completely misunderstands and misapprehends like the nature of that relationship. Yes. He interprets the relationship as Quest having sexual desire for him, and that being the thing, where like Amuro much more like astutely observes that the things that she wants is like a father that supports her, and that's why she's like chasing after these older men. At first it's Amuro, then it's Char, because we see at the beginning of that movie how like awful her relationship with her dad is. And that like, and that's like part of the thing that feels like a bit asexual about Char, is like he intellectually understands sexual desire,
right?
But because he more intellectually understands it and he doesn't fully emotionally understand it, he misunderstands a lot of his relationships with people. He misunderstands his relationship with oh god, I'm blanking on her name, but the woman in Zeta Gundam that leaves and goes and joins Shiriko. Yeah, Regalunda. He like misunderstands that dynamic in that relationship. So it's like he is both simultaneously very savvy about some of the ways that like sex plays into his life, but then also seems so completely like ignorant or like stupid about how it interacts with other people at the same time. That's part of like where I see the kind of like asexual nature of the character.
I think that's true, and I think because, and we talked about this a lot in last week's episode, we never are in Char's head, really.
Yeah.
We get glimpses, but we don't get in there. I think you can kind of go either way. I think the Ace reading is like very clearly there in a lot of ways, and I think the sort of queer, almost pansexual reading is also there in a lot of ways. And you can't really say one is right or wrong because we don't know,
Yeah, because either way, like whether or not he feels like legitimate like sexual desire for like Amuro or Garma, he will never act on it, right? Like he will, like if he feels it, he represses it.
Yeah.
But it is like a very clear, deliberate choice in Origin here of calling back on those like homoerotic elements that are from both the original story and then also reproduced in the Origin manga, of like the shower scene and all that stuff that is like, very clearly there's like a homoerotic dynamic going on there, and reproducing that, but in a like very classical like boys love or BL, which is, the term for the type of fiction that is about like gay romance that's mostly targeted towards heterosexual women in Japan, but it's like a big subculture genre in Japan. And the like all boy academy, whether it's like a school or it's a military school, like with a historical setting that's very typical, and this is like a pseudo World War II style setting that they have, with this kind of like Nazi Germany-esque dynamic between like the Federation and the Zeon and all that kind of stuff. It is like definitely leaning into and feels very conscious of the ways that like those things are coded in society as like homosexual relationships of developing young men in all boys schools.
Yeah, I mean, it's inherent to the genre because it's homosocial relationships at a minimum. And so homoeroticism is almost always going to come into it, whether you intend it or not, you know? Some of the ones I gave earlier, you know, from like the silly, like Stripes, to the, you know, classic, like pillars of the genre, like The Right Stuff or something, it's there either way.
I mean, there's a scene in this. It's also in the manga. It's like it's an important enough scene that they adapted it. That where Garma falls asleep at his desk,
Yes.
like muttering about the scene where he covered for Char after he gets slapped in with the sunglasses and all of that. And Char goes over, he looks at him coldly, and then puts the blanket over his shoulders. Like, there is no way to read that scene as anything other than there is like a homoerotic dynamic at play here. To some extent, it's like the extent of like what are Char's intentions there and what is he actually feeling. That is a thing that I think is like impossible to give a definitive answer for, because it's like what is he doing and feeling in that scene feels so distant and weird and kind of alien.
That has long been one of my favorite scenes in the entire Origin OVA. I love it in the manga. You talked last week, Sean, and I talked about it in week 1, about how Yasuhiko's manga is very decompressed, which is to say that it takes a lot of panels to do simple things for the reason of really studying characters' emotions. And that is one of those moments where the scene of him going and putting the blanket on, there's just panel after panel after panel of looking at Char's face and his eyes. Sometimes they're covered by the sunglasses, sometimes you can see one eyeball, and you are trying to read, why does he get out of bed, go over to Garma, and put this blanket on him? And I love that scene because it's one of the most like abject versions of Char. It's the middle of the night, nobody else is around, no one else is watching. There is no material gain to really be had from this thing, but he does it. And so you're wondering, is it a real affection? Is it an actual like sexual or just brotherly affection that comes out from that? Is it because he's paying Garma back for sticking up for him earlier with the military guy? Because that's one of the only moments that Garma affirmatively asserts leadership without Char's prompting. Or is it something more sinister? Is it like, I got to keep this boy under my wing because I have plans for this kid? There's a lot of ways to read it, and there's no right answer, and that is why we will continue recording exorbitantly long podcasts on the subject of Char Aznable and his psychology, right?
Yeah, because it's because like kind of all of those things are at play at the same time, right? That there his relationship with Garma, I think one of the things that's fascinating about it, and this kind of prequel version gets to zoom in on it, is that Garma is the person in some ways that like Char should have been, right? He is the young boy who is the heir to the great, like, you know, controlling force of the space colony. Like, he is, you know, effectively, like, Garma Zabi is the de facto inheritant of the philosophy of Zeon Zum Daikun as expressed by the Republic of Zeon, which is ruled by the Zabi family that Garma is like the favored son of. You know, obviously, like, Giran is the one who is actually in control, but Degwin has the greatest affection for Garma and is clearly like Garma's the one that Degwin cares about. And so Char like kind of sees that. I think it's impossible not to like see himself in that. That's part of, I think, where the like very conscious choice of the funeral in episode 1 for Zeon Zum Daikun. You have the moment where young Casval Rem Deikun looks over and sees Garma, and there's like a moment of like connection visually with those two characters. Is that there is a like mirroring of the prince who has been deposed and the like not commoner but like the aristocrat that has been elevated into nobility in the deposed prince's place.
Yes. There's you know, so there's like jealousy wrapped up with anger, wrapped up with this revenge mission, wrapped up with, I think, the eternal question from Gundam 79 on through the Origin. In what ways does Char like Garma? Like, does Char just observe him as like a fucking cockroach to be stepped on? Does he actually like this person in a friendly way, like enjoys being in their company? Does he like him on another level in that he would like him to come join him in the shower, maybe? Like, you know, like all of those. And I kind of vacillate on that. I think there's at least some degree of actual affection for this kid. I do not think he ever hates Garma in the way he hates Caecilia or something. But
because Garma has no part in any of the rest of that shit, right? I mean, it's the thing that he tells Garma when he, does the very sinister thing of calling in after he's assured Garma's death, and he tells him regret the fact that you were born into the Zabi family. That's the reason he gives to Garma for his death. It's not any specific that Garma's done. It's just the fact that you were born into that family, and that's why you have to die. So it's regret that, you spoiled brat. Ha 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 ha.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. It's regret that, and then it's listen to me laugh while you die.
Yeah.
He still whether or not he, whatever the reasons, he still sticks the knife in and twists it.
Yes.
He twists the knife in a way he doesn't have to, just for his revenge. So there are a lot of questions there. And, I gotta say, it speaks to how good, unusually good the Origin is as a prequel, that, this could so easily be fanboy wish fulfillment. More time with Char and Garma, yay! And instead, I think they do it perfectly, literally perfectly, the stuff between them in terms of actually enriching that relationship, our understanding of it, the psychology of the characters feeds perfectly into original, first Gundam 79. It works perfectly, and I can very easily imagine the more creatively bankrupt version of this where it's just a prequel for the sake of spending more time with them.
Yeah, there's definitely, and I think it's part of the, the origins of this thing as in manga, right? Pun not intended there. But the fact that this is designed from Yasuhiko's perspective as a sequence that is enriching a story that he has already told in the manga version, I think that's part of what gives it that dimension. If this was only and solely an original anime project designed as a prequel to Gundam and not a retelling of Gundam that incorporates a prequel into its narrative, I think you would get the this is just the fan whatever, we just you just have, it might be kind of fun, but it doesn't enrich anything about your understanding. And instead this is very consciously meant to be commentary on and feeding on and building on those characterizations as Yasukazu Yasuhiko has reimagined them in his manga version.
Yeah, the bad version of this would be the prequel checklist of what are all the things you want to see more of from a Gundam prequel with all these characters who eventually, might be dead, but now they're alive. And the thing is, Gundam the Origin does wind up hitting most of the things you would probably want on that checklist, but it does it because it's telling a very fulsome, expanded story of the original first Gundam, and then it breaks into this flashback, where, as you say, Sean, everything it's doing has some relationship to the story as Yasuhiko is telling it. And so there's a real integrity and thoughtfulness to it that you wouldn't get from the let's make a prequel for the sake of a prequel version of this.
Yeah, and that's where you get this core dynamic of this episode of Char and Garma's relationship and the richness of it, because that richness is there in the original dynamic in the relationship. You just get to have a deeper window into it, and it's it is phenomenal.
Absolutely. So let's back up a little bit to the entire Char Garma dynamic, because it really does have this sort of classic military movie feel of it starts out and Char's the kid who's good at everything, damn it, he can run track the fastest, he's great at basketball, I love that basketball scene, very good animation there, he's the one who figures out the math equation, and Garma is just, darn it, Garma can never be as good as Char, and then they have this hike, they're hiking on the trail, and Char winds up saving him after pulling out the knife and then whittling fucking spears to really, that is also one of those scenes, Sean, that is just stuck in my fucking brain, in the fucking hippocampus of my Gundam fandom, is Char with the knife over Garma, making the spears, and then they turn out to be things for the tent. God, he's very good at this. Yeah,
the anime version in particular, really lingers on that moment more than the manga does.
Yes.
They take their time with it. And there's something about this whole dynamic of the episode that they exaggerate it from the way the manga does. I think very intentionally, to sort of narrow its focus of that there's a bigger extreme gap between like Char's performance and Garma's, where like Garma, like the way his relationship with the kind of lackeys that follow around him and his cronies is way more exaggerated and more gag manga-esque. Like it's very like severe. Whereas like it's a bit more core, sort of grounded the way that that's depicted in the manga. There's less focus on it, but it's stuff of like, you have a really great moment where after the equation thing has happened, Garma stops Char outside the building, and then one of Garma's cronies puts his hand on Char's shoulder. Char just glares at him. The guy freaks out, and that's as far as it goes in the manga. In the anime, they then add the guy like slides backwards 50 feet, like breaks the concrete curb with his feet, and like falls back into a bush or something because of like the incredible pressure of the gaze that Char gives on him. And that's the kind of stuff that the anime, I think they look at this and they accentuate it. Like, Char's not just, like, good at basketball. He's, like, the best person you've ever seen at basketball in your whole life. And Garma's, like, okay at it. And it's like, you know, Garma doesn't just have, like, a couple of flunkies. Garma's, like, so slow in the, like, lap around the thing that he's, like, 2 laps behind or whatever. But there's, like, 50 people behind him just slowly jogging. Those kinds of things are exaggerated to really build out that gap and make it very distinct and more extreme and more comedic for the anime version, which I think is a pretty canny choice that reminds me of kind of some of the stuff that the Lord of the Rings adaptations did, of like, make it more dramatic because it plays better in like animation or in like a movie format if there's a much more distinct difference or contrast between these things.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so, you know, it makes the moments where... Because also you just got to remember that all the great lines that are there in the manga are going to be read by Shuichi Ikeda, right?
Uh-huh.
And so you'll have the moment like when this is before Garma falls down the hill, but it's raining and Char is under this like rock outcropping, and so he's dry, and Garma's just lying under his fucking canopy, and Char looks over and says, "Come and join me. It's nice and dry over here." And it's like the beginning of Char's just subtle needling of Garma, and you can tell there's just honey on his voice with every word he says. And then when he builds him the tent, he leans down and says, "Call it your palace." And I wrote in my notes, "Thus the gaslighting begins." And so when you exaggerate all of that, it makes those moments when Char comes in and fucking pokes him with the stick all that much funnier and, like, more dramatic.
Yeah, because part of, like, the relationship between Garma and Char from, like, Garma's perspective is Char is, like, the friend who keeps him grounded, because he's, like, as far as Garma knows, like, Char is just, like, some country boy from Texas colony, you know, who just happens to be, like, incredibly skilled and talented, but isn't, like, born into or understands, like, the world of wealth and power and politics of the Zabi family, even though, you know, as we know, Char understands that stuff very, very well. He probably understands it a lot better than Garma does, because his family has been destroyed by the game of politics that the Zabi family plays, whereas, like, Garma's very sheltered from it. But Char lets Garma see this, like, friend that knocks all that stuff away and laughs at him when he moves in and, like, has the roommate thing be changed. It's like, ha ha ha, but you're the only person who could do this because you're the Zabi family. He's the guy who, like, very sarcastically calls this little tent thing he built, like, Garma's palace, with, like, a sarcastic jab in the ribs, basically, being like, it's, you know, that we are the same. And he's in this friendship for Garma knocks down a lot of the pretension of his status. And there's something that's so fucked up about that friendship.
Yes.
That is something that should be so good and enriching for Garma, but it's exactly the thing that then allows Char to manipulate Garma whenever Char wants to, because Garma just believes what Char tells him.
And that's all there in Gundam 79.
Yes.
That's all there, is that there's this sense that, like, Char is the one person in Garma's big circle who doesn't treat him as Garma Zabi, you know, scion of the Zabi family. He's the one who, like, Garma can have what he thinks are frank conversations with.
Yes. And that's what makes it, like, the best con of all, because from Garma's perspective, Char is in his, like, most intimate confidence. As you say, like, Garma understands these as, like, fully frank, honest conversations, the kinds of conversations he wouldn't be able and can't have with anybody else. But that is the thing that makes the con so unbeatable, is that Char has worked his way into that level of relationship with Garma.
Yeah, Garma thinks Char is the most honest person in his life, and he's actually the most dishonest. That's a very good con.
Yeah. It's a fucked up thing.
It's so
makes you
good.
feel real bad for little Garma Zabi. It's like he just doesn't stand a fucking chance.
Oh man, but I love it all. I love him. Yeah, I love that they wind up being roommates. All of that stuff. It's so fucking good.
I really love the moment where, so Garma has the broken leg and everything, and they, like, he has Char, like, lean on him and stuff and, like, bring him to the finish line or whatever from the hike. And there's just these lines from the Zeon soldiers that I find very funny. It's like, we see them! They're there! It's Char Aznable and it's Garma Zabi! It's like, oh, he's on Char's shoulder. They're smiling. They're waving. They're laughing.
Yes,
and it's
very
just like
good.
the way the guy's saying it is like a reporter. It's just, there's something about those lines I find very funny. And I like whoever, plays like the random Zeon soldier that delivers those lines, like gets the like humor of those lines and how like sort of formalized they are. This just like, oh, they're waving and smiling. It's all okay. It's great.
Well, and Char is playing it up. He's got this like
Yes.
big doofy grin on his face, and he's waving, and it's just so good. He knows exactly what role to play. As much as I'm going to praise Shuichi Ikeda in this episode, I also do want to give a shout out to Garma's VA. Originally voiced by Katsuji Mori in the original anime, now voiced here by Tetsuya Kakihara. I think he's fucking great. It's a great Garma Zabi performance.
Yeah, it's a really great performance. That it's not a thing that it's not him trying to do an impression of the original performance, but he's got a similar kind of voice. But especially like it feels like a younger version of that character that's a bit more immature. And this actor Tetsuya Kakihara is in a lot of stuff. The main thing that people would know him from probably is he's the main character of Gurren Lagann. He's also one of the main characters of the Fairy Tail anime. And then he's just like in a lot of stuff. Like he's just a pretty ubiquitous actor. It's a really, really solid performance that's dialed in just right, of where it feels comedic at times because the character is very comedic, but there's always that very grounded heart of this sort of very spoiled but kind of earnest and compassionate young man that is who Garma is. Like, Garma's not a bad person. He's like a pretty good person. He's like, in the ranking of the Zabis, he's probably just below Dozel, who I would say like Dozel is probably the best of them.
Because Dozel at least has real substance. Garma doesn't have a whole lot of substance to him. But yeah, Garma is the one, by far the most well-adjusted, I would say.
Yeah, like, and if he didn't have this very like parasitic relationship with Char that like stunts his development, Garma could have potentially been like a pretty cool dude. But he definitely, like, his relationship with Char, I think you see like cages him in many ways, and that dynamic is definitely here in this episode.
Yeah. So, moving into sort of the second half of the episode, I want to talk about Sean, what I think is one of the... It's not a change, because it's filling in history we didn't know before, but I think one of the boldest additions Yasuhiko makes to the Gundam lore, which is having Char Aznable be fairly central in instigating the One-Year War. Mm-hmm. That's a bold thing that he does. It's actually even bolder in the manga. There's one significant change we should talk about here, and this is what I was mentioning earlier. In the OVA version, the episode that we're talking about this week, there's this event where a Federation ship wants to cut in line at the docking bay, basically, and it inadvertently causes a big crash that takes out an agricultural block, and that leads to the big Zeon riots that then help instigate the Dawn Rebellion that Char engineers and all of that, right?
Yeah.
In the manga, and I think this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the biggest change in this episode at least, is the way that whole thing goes is that there's a meteor on a path to pass by Side 3 space. Char in his dorm has hacked into the Fed monitoring station responsible for observing asteroids, and Garma sees him doing it, and Char points out there's a meteor on a highly risky orbit, but Garma thinks, hey, it's the monitoring station, they haven't raised alarm, it must be okay, and Char seems pretty shifty. Then the next day, there's this scene that is not in the anime, where Dozel is giving the graduation speech because they're moving out from being cadets to graduating from the academy. And Char is checking his watch through this whole scene, which we see Garma keeps looking at him, and Char is checking his watch. And then we cut to the monitoring station where everyone is freaking out. There's been a basic input error, is what they say, that caused them not to see the true trajectory of the meteor until it's too late. Now it's on a collision course with Side 3. It has a high chance of hitting Zoom City. It makes contact during Dozel's speech, and that is the thing that knocks out the agricultural block. And then there's a little more detail about that, how that sort of creates a fallout through Xeon. And that is the thing that instigates this widespread dissatisfaction amidst the Xeon citizenry. And so the implication, without ever telling us, is that Char clearly had something to do with this event as well. And that is completely removed in the anime, although the anime still has him be fully responsible for the Dawn Rebellion, which is also one of the instigating events of the One-Year War.
Yeah, because there's a lot of like knock-on changes that come along with this stuff, and this is like the biggest difference because there's kind of two dynamics with the way that sequence works in the manga, because you can read it as like Char did something specifically, which like I think there's lots of evidence for that, or it is also just like because the way the political situation works out from the Xeon perspective is that the Federation being the thing that manages these kinds of like meteor countermeasures and things like that and all that, and not allowing that to be the domain of the colonies being the political controversy. I like that more than the like traffic thing.
I do too. I like it a lot more.
OVA does. Because there's there's a very different dynamic of the tension here between the Federation and Xeon in the manga versus the OVA. In the OVA, it escalates very dramatically and very quickly to like Federation squads end up opening fire on Xeon protesters and stuff like that, and that doesn't happen in the manga. In the manga, there is this slow building tension about like who has what political rights based on, the Xeons who are like a colonized people and the Federation who are colonizers. And it's the classic, like America kind of any, dispute that has caused a colony to go independent. Oftentimes, one of the major factors is that political issues are being determined by people who don't actually live in or are not affected by the place that those political issues are determining the like quality of life of. And so that political issue, I think, is like a little bit more grounded and interesting. I think the Char thing is silly. Like, I don't like the implications, so I just, in my head, I'm like, Char didn't do it. Because I think it's unnecessary and it's too much. But that basic political scenario, I think, is a little bit more kind of potent and grounded. And then the fallout of it is this growing tension where there are more protests amongst the Xeon, and then the Federation are moving troops and repositioning troops to be more in the proximity of Zoom City and Side 3. And so there's this sense of like the pressure of this situation is building and building and building. And that's the opportunity that Char then sees to begin this thing of attacking the nearby Federation base in order to disarm it. Instead of the way the OVA portrays it, which is more like there is already some kind of low-scale conflict that is occurring, and because of that low-scale conflict, Char is like, it's our duty, Garma, to like go and take this base, rather than it being a very kind of preemptive thing that they do in the manga. And I would say that, like, generally speaking, I prefer the like manga's depiction of the way those political tensions like build and evolve, whereas like the OVA, I understand why they do this. They kind of simplify it and make it more direct and like dramatic in order to make it easier to move those pieces along. Whereas it's very like much more deliberate and implied the way that the manga does it.
I agree with all of that. I think the main reason the anime makes that change is just because the thing with the meteor and all of that is a pretty long series of events that is harder to depict in an anime, I think, than it would be on the page. And so they go for something a little more direct and visual. I generally agree with you. I think the idea that Char is playing 25-dimensional chess and is like, well, if I let this asteroid... Because obviously the implication is not that Char did anything to the asteroid. That'd be impossible. It's that he messed with their systems enough that they didn't catch it in time. And I think that strains credulity, I think. I think Char Aznable is many things. I think the idea that he would be planning far enough ahead that, like... If I do this and the meteor hits, then they'll respond this way, and then I can do this. That's like, I don't buy that, and I think that's dumb. You can very easily read the scene as just that he is monitoring it, and he's curious and engaged in the overall political situation because he's looking for an opening, and I buy that 100%, and I think the scene can be read that way, and it's fine. It is intentionally vague, but overall I agree with you. I think the whole thing with the meteor... Because it's just one of those pieces of world building that Gundam in general is just so good at, of like, well, if you had people in space and you had all these colonies, you would naturally need a good, like, bureau for monitoring, like, stellar objects, right? You would
Yeah.
need someone thinking about that. We have that on Earth right now to a certain extent. And then what if it was this exact scenario where the Earth Bureau tasked with that missed something, it hit the colonies, and then the colonies are like, well, clearly you guys are not invested enough in this because it doesn't affect you. This should be in our hands. It's very much like the Boston Tea Party kind of thing. Like,
Yeah.
was the tea tax in and of itself enough to cause a revolution? Obviously not, but it stood in for this larger issue of like, fuck you guys, this stands in for all the things that make us angry about not being self-governed. And that's the kind of like, that's where Yasuhiko just fucking shines, is in this level of historical thinking that like blends with Tomino's storytelling in a perfect way for this like very fulsome world building.
Yeah, and just to say that like the OVA does do some of that stuff very well in some scenes that we kind of skipped over. Of there's multiple scenes that really show you the tension between the Federation, which is technically in control, but like the very blatant efforts by Zeon of like creating a standing trained military directly under the watch and view and purview of the Federation, and all of that stuff, which is pulled directly from the manga and is adapted very faithfully in that kind of first half of the episode, I think is very vibrant and feels very like historically literate. There are lots and lots and lots of instances, both like with America, again, like Nazi Germany is a very clear comparison point of this, of like, because of a lot of complicated political factors, even if you strongly assume that this group of people is like just building a rebellion right in front of you and using some of your resources to do it, like if you try to intervene in any direct way, you then just become the flame that then lights the whole thing off. And so it's like it's almost become too late by the time that this academy is being developed for the Federation to actually interfere. And you see the way that slowly all the political power, capital, and influence that the Federation has in this kind of sphere is being taken away from them. And like the most dramatic scene of that is the at the end of their like mock battle or whatever that Char and Garma and all of them participate in, and the Federation officer reading out his little instructions. Char asks a bunch of very like pointed, snobbish questions about the whole thing, and then begins this whole series of events where he gets slapped. Those tensions of the officer thinking he's in charge, and actually it's all these kids that are the ones who are in charge because it's their home, they're the ones with the political influence. That dynamic to me is like really vibrant and effective.
Yes, I think that's the thing the anime pulls out and does a great job with, because it all comes to a head in that scene. But we have several moments beforehand, like early in the episode, you have the welcome ceremony where Char comes in late and sits down and is next to Lino, the kid he's going to kill at the end of the episode, and all of that. And you have General Revel is there in the room, and you have Dozel, who is the superintendent of the school. I fucking love that detail, by the way. I totally believe Girin would give Dozel Zabi this job that he is absolutely not in. It's like, Dozel Zabi is many things. I don't think he's superintendent of the Zeon Military Academy material, but Dozel is doing that job, and Dozel starts by saying, like, thank you, General Revel, for being in attendance. Fuck you, Federation, and goes off on this, like, just, like, absolute, like, kind of, like, tear, and you just see Revel sitting there, and, like, I suspect Revel is someone, were he fully in charge, would do something about this, but clearly there's some, like, we never get details on this. There is some Neville Chamberlain-esque politician in the Federation who is, like, on this, like, road of appeasement with Zeon, and it's not working, obviously. Same way that, like, yeah, we'll let Hitler have this piece of land. He can have Poland. That's okay. You know, like that kind of thing, like, over and over again until finally, like, you have to fight the war. And then you do come up to the moment where Char has these questions. And I love Char's pointed questions to the guy. It's two things he brings up. He has, one is like, why are we doing these military exercises where we would fight at such a disadvantage? What force would we be fighting where we are at this level of a disadvantage? And second, does the Zeon military exist just to underline to us how much bigger your military is? And that's what gets him slapped. I love that scene. I think it's phenomenally animated, where the slap happens, the glasses go up. It's one of the best renderings of a Yasuhiko character panel from the manga, of Char turning back, and the guy sees the eyes of terror for a moment, and then all the students come in chanting, pick it up. Garma, this is like the most fulsome moment Garma has in his role as leader ever, because I think he has genuine friendly affection for Char. And without Char having to say one more word, that whole class is riled up, and the dude gets on his knees and picks up the glasses for him. It is a very chilling scene.
Yeah, that is so effective at demonstrating like the political power dynamics and how they have shifted at this point. And Char's canniness of that, like, this is the exact scenario that he wanted. It's why he spoke out of turn. He knew that this would happen, and that's like the look in his eyes, right? That like the Federation commander slaps the glasses off. He sees Char's expression in his eyes and is like, Char has won, right? It's like the officer didn't even realize he was playing Char's game, but he was playing Char's game, and Char has just won. And it is such a that is like where you see Char's political savvy at play. That's where you see his ability to manipulate things, as he can read where the power dynamics have been moving in this space and is able to see like an exact string to pull on to his advantage. Because there's also, and this is a scene they cut out of the anime, but there's an implication later on in the manga that one of the reasons why he does that is because he knows it's like it's going to be a mark against him for insubordination, which then ranks him number 2 in the academy, and Garma gets to be number 1, so that Garma gets to be put up into the supreme place, that Garma realizes this is why Char did this thing. Not a scene that like is necessary, but is like a nice additional detail if you read the manga version.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that that's like the kind of detail from Lord of the Rings that would only be in the extended cut, but I like that kind of detail a lot. I remember that. Because although I have to admit, I'm not sure how Garma got to number 2 given everything we saw earlier, but it's fine.
He's very smart, you know?
He
like,
is.
he's the only other dude who's able to do most of that, like, extremely weird, complicated, insane equation, and he only fucks up at one part.
That's true. That is very true. So, but obviously the main string Char pulls on in this episode is the detail that this is a Zeon military academy right next to a giant Fed base where they are pouring soldiers in to put down this growing rebellion in the colony, and Char sees this moment to use Garma's clout to stage what will later be known as the Dawn Rebellion. And before we get into that just whole side of the episode, Sean, I kind of want to come back to a question I was starting to pose earlier, which is, certainly with the Dawn Rebellion, however you want to read the meteor strike in the manga, Char has a vested interest in getting a war going in this version of the story. And I do think that's one of the most interesting and bold details in the origin. What do you think of that as a part of this whole prequel project, that Char has a fairly direct hand in starting the One-Year War?
I think it makes sense. I think one thing that works for it is that it's not a thing of like, it's never portrayed as the One-Year War wouldn't have happened.
Exactly.
It's just that like it happens earlier. Because
he helps push it along.
Yeah, because you do have a scene in the manga with Girin and Degun that like is technically in the anime, but it's like the dialogue is completely different, where you see how much like Girin is like chomping at the heels of like wanting this war to start, and like his propaganda efforts and all of that he is really spurring on all these protests behind the scenes, and that Degun is not happy with this, because Degun, as we talked about in episode 1, he is a very cautious, careful politician. He doesn't want a war because a war is chaos. This is something you can see in like the current American political scenario. The last thing a Republican would want in America right now would be like a civil war or a big armed conflict, because there is a risk whenever you have like huge revolutionary violence outbreaks. You don't know which side that coin is going to fall on, whether or not your side's going to win or the other side will win. So if you're comfortably in power and you can just nudge that in your direction bit by bit by bit, that's a lot safer than like rolling the dice of a revolution and like opening up the potential of like extreme violence, because you have no idea how those revolutions are going to go. But Girin is so hungry for power, and because he's not number 1, he wants this war to happen really bad, and he's kind of doing everything he can to nudge all those efforts along. Char just happens to be in a particular spot where he can take advantage of the existing political unrest to do a thing that would likely have happened without his input, but because he does it first, it gives him like clout that then eventually is going to think that allows him to be a mobile suit pilot, that allows him to be under Dozel Zabi's command, that allows him to be at the position of influence that he really wants to be in.
It is also, and all of that is true, but it is also, this is kind of where the anime starts playing on a theme. It's there in the manga, but I think it's one of the things the anime kind of brings out in adaptation. And it's the note that episode 6, the final episode, I think very pointedly ends on, the cut to credits, not the post-credit stuff, which is this idea that this war happens because enough people in the world want it. And there is some fucking sickness, pathology, whatever you want to call it, in the human condition in this time and place, that there's enough yearning for, let's just fight this fucking thing out. And there's a lot of people with a vested interest in that, from Garma Zabi, who sees it as naked power, to General Revel, who sees it as, I'm going to put these fuckers down, finally off the leash, basically. Like, let's do this. That's kind of, the Antarctic Treaty comes down to a lot of that, or the Antarctic speech he gives, which you'll see in episode 6. To Char Aznable, who he wants a war to fight in. Like, I think that's like a simple little thing, is that, like, in part because it will help him get closer to the Zabis and all of this stuff. But also, I think Char thinks it's going to be fucking fun, right? Like, that is one of the underlying things in this episode, is that Char is living his best life. He is having the time of his fucking life in this episode, as we know he generally does through all the one-year war stuff. Char Aznable has a good time doing all of this stuff. And I think that is one of the, like, provocative and interesting things this anime does. And it's not as simplistic as saying, like, oh yeah, wars happen because people like war. I don't think it's that simple. What it is there's enough people with enough people who have their hands on the levers of power who want to do this thing, that it happens. And I do think that's a general truth about war, is it happens when there's enough people with their hands on the levers of power to make it happen. You know, the Iraq war in America didn't come out of the blue. There were a lot of people, a lot of conservatives and neoliberals and all this stuff, who wanted to go to war with Iraq. And eventually there were enough of them with their hands on the levers that when 9/11 happened, they were able to move those levers, you know?
Yeah, those inciting incidents are excuses. They're not like direct causes. They are excuses that people then use to go to war. And the Iraq War is like a very good example of that, because Iraq had jack all shit to do with 9/11.
Yes.
But it creates this excuse to go do the war that you want to do for, like, you know, and then lots of people that are involved in that have their own motivations, either because they're like ideological racists, or, you know, whatever, or they want, like, they're more practical and they just want the resources and they want the power that those resources come with. But that's definitely a dynamic you see here, and that Char is one of those people. And you get a line that I think the manga builds up to this line better, because there's something I definitely prefer about the, like, that this is a, like, you know, powder keg where the pressure is building but it hasn't gone off yet. And I think the dynamic of the Federation having, like, actually killed people in those riots, like, waters it down a little bit.
Yeah.
But there is a key line for Char here, that is when he's convincing Garma to actually do this thing.
I know what you're going to say.
The last line he has, where he says, don't, and I have the Japanese version, so this is a transition off the top of my head, but basically, like, don't you want to turn the gears of history with your own two hands? And the way that that's built up to, and the way he says it, is very much like he's saying that to Garma, but he's also, like, declaring, this is the thing I want to do. Like, this is why I'm doing this, because I want to take the gears and cogs of history and turn them with my own two hands and express my power on the flow of history itself. And, like, that's the thing that he does. That's why he wants to do it. And it's like, at the end of the day, that feels like that's his primary motivation in this whole crazy rebellion he starts up.
Absolutely. Also, Sean, the translation you gave off the top of your head is word for word verbatim the translation in the subtitles, because it's in my notes. No, it is it's a phenomenal line. It's one of those, you know, some of Shuichi Keita's Charisms make you laugh heartily, and some of them send a goddamn chill down your spine. This one sends a chill down your spine, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a really good piece of writing by Yoshikazu Yasuhiko, because the way it's phrased in Japanese is so, like, you can't, even if you gave that line to another character, you wouldn't be able to read it in anything other than Shuichi Keita's Char voice, because it's such a Char-ass fucking Char line. It is, to me, like, one of, like, the iconic Char lines, like, you know, is like, you know, it's there's nothing more dreadful than, like, looking back on the mistakes of one's youth and stuff like that. Like, he just has these lines he gives that you're like, this is a line for this character that you will always remember.
Yes, absolutely. I love when Char brings the plan to Garma. I love how, like, terrifyingly well developed the plan is. Like, Char has planned this thing to a T. He's basically giving Garma this, like, genius military operation on a silver platter. And, of course, here's the thing. Garma is not, at any level, I think, the kind of person who actually wants to turn the gears of history with his own two hands, right?
Yes.
He's doing it because, Senpai noticed him, basically, right? It's to do it because Char's always led me right before, right? So let's do a rebellion. You also get here, and I think we should talk about the entire subplot with Lino, the boy who knew Char Aznable, the Western kid from Texas, and figures out that this kid is not Char Aznable.
Yeah, so this is the other, like, major change, and is an addition. There is an entire subplot here, which is very much, I think, is like here to give this episode how it ends and to give it its, like, fulsome, like, circular arc. But yes, you have Lino, who is a character that exists in the manga, but he just doesn't have this role. All he is like Char's old roommate that Garma replaces, and then he does get killed in the rebellion. And he's one of, like, a number of students who, like, Garma's, like, holding his picture or whatever in a big parade. But here Lino figures out Char's actual identity. There's a really good beat that they add into that mock battle of Lino asking him, like, oh man, this is just like when you ran that, like, touchdown in Luna football or whatever the fuck crazy.
It's called Luna
space
Ball.
game. Yeah, Luna Ball. And Char's like, what? Yeah, okay, huh? And, obviously from our perspective, we know that it's like a rhetorical trap because that Luna Ball game never happened. And then they move the scene of where Char tries on the headset to being one where it's just he and Lino alone, whereas in the manga he puts it on in front of Garma, which I wish that Garma was there because it's I like the idea of Garma seeing the moment of Char being anointed with his, like, crazy weird mask thing.
Yes.
But this dynamic is the thing that gives the entire last act of this episode its focus, because it's not now just about Char executing this plan, and you see it in much more detail in the anime because you want this, like, big action scene, because we haven't really had a big action scene in the series since the end of episode 1. You want the big crazy action scene, but also now Char has this other objective of this, like, weird kid that is a loose end, and if there's one thing that Char Aznable is not going to fucking stand for, it's a loose fucking end, and he's going to cut that thing off. And this is, I think, a very good, smart adaptational change to give this episode its, like, focus to a, like, clear ending point by creating a new dynamic and a new subplot with this character.
I was very surprised when I read the manga because I was actually very excited to get to those pages and see, like, how they did the thing with Lino in the manga, because this is one of my favorite things in the anime. I love this entire plot, and I do think it's overall an improvement to add this in because I think it just adds so much. I like the idea that Char gets his iconic headpiece from someone he fucking unambiguously betrays and murders is so perfect. It's one of those that's like, of course he got his name from someone he murdered. He also gets his mask from someone he murders. The other thing I love about the Lino thing, like, my only hesitation in saying that what he does to the real Char Aznable isn't his cruelest thing is because what he does to Lino might be even crueler. Because here's the thing, Lino gives him every reason on Earth to keep him around. Lino is a true believer in the Zeon cause. He doesn't like the Zabis. He recognizes that he's Casval Rem Deikun, and he wants him to be. Like, he wants Casval to come to power. He's loyal, right? Like, this is, it's a loose end, but it's a very loyal loose end. He fucking worships the ground Char walks on. When Char says, hey, go get this tank over here, he's like, Senpai noticed me, thank you, this is so great. He's so happy about it over and over again. And I think Char would kill him no matter what. But the thing is, I think it's when he is yelling out, Casval, 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 and you realize that's the name he's been calling him by. More than anything else, that's the thing that gets you killed in Char Aznable's presence, because he's not Casval, and he doesn't want to hear that name. And there's that line there when after he gets Lino blown up, and then he flies out of the explosion on his fucking jetpack, and the Red Comet theme for this series, the musical piece, is, like, soaring. It's at its big, like, full expression. And he says, Boku wa Casval janai, Char Aznable da. Like, he is, he's like, I am Char Aznable. They even do a great piece of mirroring here, where I mentioned earlier that when the ship with the real Char Aznable blows up, Caecilia's face comes out of that. like as a fade.
Yeah.
They do the same thing here, where when the tank blows up with Lino in it, Char's face fades out of that, so it's the same kind of like murder. And that is like, and then right after that is when he enters the control room. They have him framed by this big red emergency light outside. He is the Red Comet in all but name at this point, and it is such a delicious birth of that persona.
Yeah, because that's the arc they've built, right, for this episode. And it's like why the subplot's really important is to like create that moment where he like directly and dramatically accepts this like full identity of like the Char Aznable that we know. Because at the beginning of the episode is when he like technically adopts the identity, and you see the death of the old Char Aznable and this one taking it over. But this is where it's not just he is now like posing as this other person. He has become a new person who is Char Aznable, right? And that's what he is claiming here. And yeah, I think the thing that like why he kills Lino is very much the like Lino sees him as Casval Rem Deikun, and that is an identity that we know Char abandons, right? Like Char does not have any interest in actually being Casval Rem Deikun, and he throws that off. He runs away from it. Like him killing the Zabis has nothing to do with him wanting to be in power. It's not because he wants to take the throne as Casval Rem Deikun. He just wants to express his anger, and like it gives him an excuse and a target. And then in Zeta Gundam, he spends the whole thing as Quattro Bagina, and he doesn't want to be Casval Rem Deikun or Char. He doesn't want to be this relic of the old war. He just wants to be who he is. And he's running away from that responsibility. And then in Char's counterattack, where he is, for an extended time, has to adopt the role of Casval Rem Deikun, as we talked about in Char's counterattack episode, in many ways, that's the time when Char feels the most false and has put on the thickest mask, is him parading himself as the Casval Rem Deikun that people want him to be. And so this like person who sees him as that old identity that he has abandoned, it's not even because it's like a security risk or like because Cassilia might find out. It's because it's like, no, I can't have someone around that thinks of me as Casval Rem Deikun, because that's not who I am. I'm Char Aznable. And that is such a like powerful, definitive note to create this like story on for this anime version.
Also, the fucking way he does it is such a perfect Char betrayal of trust, you know, giving him, like, making this kid think he's gonna go be a hero. Like, go take that tank. Here's our special channel. Only us can communicate on Channel 10, kid. And then, like, go get the tank. He gets the tank. He's like, Char, I did it. I got the tank. And he's not calling him Char. He's calling him Casval. And then Char doesn't say a word. He lets the other people on his, like, squad believe that Lino died going to get that tank. And they're all like, oh, damn it, fuck that tank. And they all get their rocket launchers out, and Lino is just yelling, Casval, please stop it. Like, these are my allies. And they blow him the fuck up. Char doesn't have to pull one single trigger to kill this kid, and he flies around smiling and declaring himself Char Aznable. Of course, that's how Char Aznable is born.
Yeah, it's really fucking cold. Because it is particularly, it's like the fact that he doesn't, he like does the least amount of effort possible to get that scenario in place.
Yes.
Like the main thing he does is just tell that, you know, go get that tank and stay on this communication channel, because this is like what the channel we're going to use. And that's it. And then the rest of the scenario just kind of plays out. And that's like the thing that's terrifying about it. It's very much like how he orchestrates Garma's death. It's just like, it's just a couple of small nudges, and then he just sits back and watches as what he wanted to be comes into the world, which is Lino's horrible, awful, dramatic death by like the people that they are his friends, who thought that they were avenging Lino's death when what they were actually doing was killing him. It's fucked up.
Man, I wonder what Char's body count is at this point already, just 3 episodes into the origin, because he has killed people in all 3 episodes.
Yep.
Dozens of people at the end of episode 1, the guy in the knight suit of armor in episode 2, and then here indirectly kills 2 people, gets a bunch of people killed in the Dawn Rebellion. You know, just, he is already amassing a fucking throne of bodies.
Yes, and he gives a grand total of 0 fucks about it.
That is very true. So, you know, the ending narration tells us that this would later be known as the Dawn Rebellion, which is great. It's a red morning, smoke, fire, the sunrise. It's actually one of the pieces of the anime that I think does the best at like emulating the look of the color spreads in Yasuhiko's manga. And this episode ends with one of my favorite
Yep.
lines Shuichi Ikeda has ever gotten to say as Char. Akai na jitsu ni ii iro da. Which is, everything is red. It's a good color, isn't it? Fucking goddamn it, Sean. I have had like a screenshot of that saved on my desktop for years because it is like every time I watch this episode I have to rewind and listen to Ikeda say it like 5 times. It's so fucking good.
Yeah, and it's a scene that doesn't exist in the manga. It's like their created endpoint for the story, and it is so fucking good. It is it's another just great all-time great Char line. That's because that's where Shuichi Ikeda just drips off of every single line or word in that line. It is amazing. Yeah, and it's just the perfect way to end, and again creates this very good, clear, dramatic arc of he started this episode out as Casval / Edward Mass, and now he ends it as like this new creature, this like, you know, the red comet basically. But this man bathed in red called Char Aznable. And that's where we leave off for this episode, and it is one of like the best endings of a thing in Gundam.
Yes.
Which is a series that has lots of great fucking endings in it.
I've got, I typed the line up in my notes in kanji and kana, and just looking at it, I hear Ikeda's voice dripping off of it, Like,
yes,
just that.
It's like the Gears of History line. It's just like you can't imagine anybody else saying that line of dialogue because it's like just so purely a Char Aznable piece of dialogue.
God, it's so fucking good. We should probably rewind a little bit, though, and talk about there are pieces with other characters in this episode, a couple of which are probably worth mentioning. We do have a scene with Sayla on side 5.
Yes.
Where we learn that Char has not kept in touch with the Aznable family at all, reminding us that every person he kills, he hurts a lot of other people, too, because he's an asshole.
Very sad piece of dialogue where like Mr. Aznable basically says like, well, at this point, since my son went off to the military academy, he's effectively dead to me. It's like, oh my god, like you don't even know you don't know how dead to you he actually is.
Oh my
and it's
god.
Really fucked up.
Yeah. Little preview, Char is not done fucking with that family. We'll get into that later. And I think the notable thing here is Sayla has 3 graves now. She has Lucifer, her mother, and Casval. She's becoming a doctor because, as she says at the graves, she's seen too many people die, too much sadness. I think it's a great line. And I also think, like, that little scene right in the middle of this episode underlines just how fucking selfish Char is in all of this. Because he is out there having the absolute time of his fucking life at the military academy, living it up as Char Aznable, playing with Garma. This is like, he is living his best life. And he has left Sayla alone, abandoned. All of her family is dead to her. She has some maybe sense that Char isn't dead, but like, she can't do anything about that. And she's just alone. And she's made other friends. Like, she has people like Diablo who are very good to her. But like, it's a miracle Sayla did not turn into a dick after all of this. Like, it speaks to what a good person she is. That all of that just made her want to be better, not want to be worse.
Yes, yeah, and it is a really important piece of contrast in the middle of the episode to remind you of, like, Sayla is out there and that she is, like, the actual strong, good person of the 2 siblings, and Char is, this selfish fucking monster for everything that he's done.
We get a phenomenal scene with Girin coming to the MS program, and he wants to cancel the whole thing because he like takes one look at the mobile work and he's like, that looks like shit. And then he gets to hear from Dr. Minovsky himself. This is, I think, a very fun part of the origin. You get to meet the man behind the Minovsky particle, and he basically explains the whole theory of why you need mobile suit combat. And Girin is on board after that and says the next unit will be called the MSO3, and all the you just go, ooh, it's the MSO3, it's the Zaku. But yes, Ginga Banjo, fantastic in that scene.
Yeah, it's just a great scene. It's just one where it's a thing where all of the world building elements in that scene are part of like all Universal Century Gundam, of like the reasoning for mobile suits, why they exist, like how they work with the reactor, the Minovsky particles and how they function, its relationship to the ships. But like, you never have it like actually sort of like explained or exposited in a like direct, clear scene. Like, I remember in the first or second Weekly Suit Gundam episode, I had to like explain some of that stuff because it's very like opaque and like very broad in Mobile Suit Gundam. Even though like all the details are there, it's just not explained to you in particular detail. It's more for you to kind of pick up. And there is something just very satisfying, just because Universal Century Gundam is one of the most incredible pieces of like science fiction world building in anything, and it's we've been away from UC Gundam for long enough, and particularly in like the weeds of a UC Gundam project for long enough that it's like getting to admire again the elegance of that sci-fi world building setup and the elegance of the justification for having mechs, which are there in actuality because you can sell good toys about mechs, and that's like why you would make this show with mechs in it. But the genius of Tomino and the rest of that team of building out that whole like complex reasoning and making it feel so real and so grounded, it's just one of the most impressive pieces of world building I've ever seen. And so like having Professor Minovsky like really kind of put a pin on it here, and in a way that feels very appropriate because of how it's situated as a prequel, and the character that is saying it and who he is saying it to, that this is the only reason why the Zeons are as successful in the war as they are. Otherwise, they'd get completely destroyed, as Garma Zabi fears. Is that like they have this one technological innovation because this is the turning point. This is like the invention of the fucking firearm. This is like the invention of airplanes. This is the invention of a thing, or like tanks. This is the invention of drones. This is the invention of a new thing that changes what combat looks like forever. And it's such a great expression of that. It's just a very fun scene that reminds me of like how much I really love this world.
Oh, 100%. And like, you know, so much of the project of the Origin manga, I think, does also come down to like taking a lot of that world building, particularly like, you know, the original novelization has all of this exposited very clearly in like very long passages where Tomino lets his nerd flag fly and like tells you all of it, and then the manga finds ways to really narrativize it in cool ways, and I think that's one of those scenes. But yeah, I love it. What else we got here? I think we should also mention that we get the first scene with Xena and Dozle. Xena is one of the girls at the academy. If you know your Gundam history, you recognize the name Xena, and you know that this woman will one day marry Dozle Zabi. But right now it seems a little improbable because she is the one who is sent to go hold up Dozle. I do think that's the one hole in Char's plan. I don't know why he thought a girl holding a single handgun on Dozle Zabi would stop Dozle Zabi, but there you go.
Because he knows that Dozle Zabi is like a sweetheart, right? That like that's the reason why he sends her specifically, is because he knows that like if it was like a big strong tough dude that he sent, Dozle would have like crushed that guy like a fucking tin can in his hands. But because it's like this very attractive young woman, Dozle's sense of like sort of like, you know, chauvinistic honor and stuff like that is not going to allow him to do anything.
And he hears that it's Garma doing it, so he's not going to go stop Garma because he doesn't want to hurt Garma.
Yeah, like she's there to like disarm him enough to like allow that Garma fact to sink in. I think it's like Char has a good read on like who Dozle is as a person. The thing I love about that scene though is like your entry into it, which is Dozle in his like office wearing a bathrobe, and like someone in an intercom tells him that there's a student that like has some like problems and wants his counseling, and he's like and like just seeing Dozle like being very thoughtful and thinking, like what could I possibly do to help her? And she comes in and it's like, oh, so what kind of problems are you having? Your grades? Is it a boy? Do you feel like the military life is not for you? It's like him trying to be this like good guy who actually wants to help out these students, because you know no student has ever come to him on like office hours or whatever shit he's got to go talk to Dozle Zabi, the 8-foot tall giant covered in scars that looks like the Frankenstein fucking monster, about their problems. This is like the only time he's had like a wholesome interaction with one of his students, and that is like incredibly funny.
It's so good. They use Dozle for humor so well in this series, because he's comic relief, but it's not selling the character short. It's always playing off of things we know about him that are true, and it's so good. Yeah, I fucking love that. In the scene with Degwin and Girin, you have a little intimation about. You get a lot of this in the Origin about how much Degwin really loves Garma, and Degwin straight up says to Girin here, if anything happens to Garma, I will never forgive you. We know how that will go in the full anime, so lots of good stuff to come there.
Yeah, because that scene, that's the one that, like, is... Because all of that is basically new dialogue, because that's a much longer scene that goes more into, like, the politics of the revolts and stuff like that they talked about earlier. But they're kind of taking... Because there will be... They do adapt the scene in the next episode, but, like, you get more of the, like, sense of how much Deadwood cares about Garma later, but because it's a later scene, they kind of lift some of that content and put it here to contextualize what's happening in the sequence of events that they've ordered it in this adaptation.
Yes. And then finally, we do get a post-credit scene in this episode where you have Amuro arriving on Side 7. They go by Luna 2. He goes through security with Haro. I fucking adore Toru Furio's reading of when he goes through, he says, Amuro Rei, 13 years old. And, like,
yes.
it's a great, cute little line reading. And then Temrei, being the dick of all dick fathers, tells Amuro, you'll be alone now. You're going to have to be the man of the house. You should go make some friends, because it's not going to be me, kid. Fucking terrible dad. And then they step out onto Side 7 and see the whole... I think the way Yasuhiko draws Side 7 is so phenomenal, because he has this specific interest in the idea of this being an unfinished colony with this big wall that they can't go past. And that's this, like... That's there in the beginning of the manga. It's there in this prequel stretch, and you see it here, and it's really well rendered. But this is a very fun little post-credit scene.
Yeah, it's just like a fun little bonus, and you just get to be reminded, God, Temrei fucking sucks.
Fucking sucks.
Such a dick. Because they cut out here. From what I remember, I don't think they put it in anywhere else in the later episodes. In the manga, you get a whole scene of him being brought onto the mobile suit project, like, before any of this happens, which I don't remember if that is something that they, like, put into one of the later episodes of the Origin. But yeah, it's just like a way to establish, like, yeah, on the Federation side, they have footage knowing that, like, there's some sort of secret mobile worker project that the Zeons are working on, and Temrei, we're going to have you start kind of brainstorming what that looks like for the Federation.
Yes. But all in all, Sean, what a fantastic fucking episode this is.
Yeah, it's phenomenal, and it's interesting having, like, read the manga, right next to watching the episode, because this is the one that they make, like, very big changes and additions and things like that. But I think they're generally, it's the kind of thing where it's like, I don't know if I would say one is my favorite version over the other. I like that they, like, kind of work in concert really well. Like, if you want the more, like, sort of grounded, like, more thoughtful political exploration stuff, the manga's a lot better at that. But if you want the, like, very dramatic, vivid character arc for Char Aznable becoming Char Aznable, like, that, zooming in on that with this episode, that's just something that, like, the Origin manga doesn't do in that kind of, like, very precise way. And I think that that's just a really cool choice that makes it very rich to engage with both versions, the original and this adaptation.
Thank God we have both,
Yes.
It's awesome. And thank God we have 3 more of these to do, Sean, because I'm having a ton of fun. Next week we'll have part 4, Eve of Destiny. And there's a lot of good stuff in the back half that we're going to get to.
Yes, and then now I can continue reading the Origin, and we'll see how much can I read. Will I be done with it by the time I record the next episode? I don't know. The manga is very good. There's a lot of it, but I have not been able to stop so far. So we will find out next week on Weekly Suit Gundam.